The secret Nazi experiments that inspired Stranger Things. What if the darkest stories weren't made up, but covered up? There are moments in history that never made it to the classroom. Events so deeply buried, so shrouded in silence, that they seem like fiction until you start connecting the dots. This is not about what's on the surface, it's about what was done in the shadows. In this video, we explore a disturbing thread that weaves together real historical secrets and one of the most popular series of the last decade. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a chilling intersection of declassified documents, forgotten programs, and the kind of truths that governments don't like to revisit. Maybe you've seen the show, maybe you think you know what it's about, but the real inspiration behind it runs deeper and darker than most people ever realize. What you're about to hear is a story that begins with war, but ends in something far more haunting. Don't look away, because the scariest monsters aren't always the ones we imagine. Sometimes they were real, and sometimes they were protected. When you hear the name Stranger Things, certain images probably flash through your mind. Monsters from other dimensions, secret underground laboratories, and a young girl bleeding from her nose whose mind is powerful enough to crush bones with a thought. But what if I told you that some of this the dark corridors, the experiments, the psychic tests, isn't pure fiction? What if these horrors weren't born in the writer's room, but in actual classified history? Beneath the show's retro glow and supernatural flair lies a shadow, one rooted in real wartime atrocities. Events so disturbing that even today, governments hesitate to speak of them. The truth is that some of the inspiration behind Stranger Things doesn't come from 1980s sci-fi. It comes from the darkest chapters of World War II, where science was no longer a tool for discovery, but a weapon for control. This is the side of history they don't teach in school. This is where fantasy collides with fact, and the lines between them begin to vanish. At the center of this real-life nightmare stands a name that still echoes through history with dread. Josef Mengele was the Nazi doctor known as the Angel of Death. Inside Auschwitz, Mengele orchestrated a parade of horrors disguised as research. He performed surgeries without anesthesia, injected chemicals into children's eyes to try and change their color, and subjected twins to gruesome comparisons, all under the twisted banner of scientific progress. But these weren't isolated cases of madness. They were part of a larger effort, a regime-wide obsession with human manipulation. And here, as what most people don't know, Mengele, a curiosity, didn't stop at flesh and blood. His fascination extended deep into the uncharted territory of the human mind. What would happen if you deprived someone of sleep for 10 days? What if you raised a child in total darkness and silence? Could you create humans who feel no fear, no pain? Could thoughts be read or implanted? To the Nazis, these weren't ethical questions, they were opportunities. Experiments began, quietly, in hidden rooms, beneath layers of concrete and secrecy, and some of them didn't end with the war. The Nazi regime's pursuit of total control didn't stop at borders. It reached into the brain, and deeper still, into the soul. Declassified documents from decades later revealed that the Third Reich had invested heavily in neurological experiments. These included hypnosis trials, sensory deprivation chambers, and disturbing attempts to store or transfer consciousness, all in the hopes of creating not just better soldiers, but programmable humans. In some of the darker corners of these experiments, children were isolated from birth, never seeing sunlight, never hearing a human voice, just to study what happened to the mind when stripped of reality. There were whispers of tests involving mind-to-mind communication, of thought projection, and even of controlling pain thresholds with mental suggestion. Most of these experiments were hidden. Many of them were destroyed, along with mountains of evidence during the chaotic final days of the war. But not all knowledge dies in fire. When Nazi Germany fell, the Allied forces didn't just seize weapons and battle plans. They took people, doctors, engineers, scientists who had spent years conducting inhumane experiments under the swastika, now rebranded as assets for a new cause. Thus began Operation Paperclip. On the surface, Operation Paperclip was a strategic program by the United States to recruit German scientists after the war for their expertise in rocketry, medicine, and physics. But under the surface, it was something else. It was a sanitized bridge from genocide to scientific progress, a way to erase past crimes with a signature and assign new titles to men who had stood over operating tables at death camps. Many of these scientists were relocated to classified military bases turned on American soil. One of the most infamous among them was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where rumors still swirl about secret research conducted deep underground. In these new laboratories, some of the same minds that had once experimented on Jewish children were now backed by US funding. The objectives hadn't changed, only the flags above the doors. Out of this came whispers of a project unlike any other. The Montauk Project. According to testimony from alleged insiders and whistleblowers, the Montauk Project operated out of a hidden facility in New York during the 1970s and 80s. There, under layers of military secrecy, children were subjected to experiments involving psychic training, time distortion, and even dimensional travel. Some claim it was an attempt to weaponize the mind. Others believe it was something far more ambitious, a quest to tear open the fabric of reality itself. Among the strangest and most chilling allegations tied to Montauk was the use of psychically gifted children. To project thoughts into the physical world, they were placed in isolation chambers, monitored constantly, exposed to strange frequencies, flashing lights, or sudden silences. The goal? To break the mind or unlock it. Other accounts describe experimental frequency weapons, capable of influencing human emotion across cities, anger, fear, confusion, all triggered remotely by sound. Then there are the teleportation tests. Many claim these trials ended in catastrophic failures, with subjects vanishing, or worse, returning altered in ways that defied logic or biology. Sounds like fantasy? Then consider this. Some of these concepts appear in disturbingly similar language in declassified CIA documents. Because while Montauk was unfolding in secret, another project was running in parallel. MK Ultra. A real, verified mind control program launched by the CIA in the 1950s. Its aim? To manipulate memory, behavior, and consciousness using LSD, hypnosis, and trauma, often on unsuspecting civilians. What's even darker, MK Ultra was directly inspired by Nazi techniques, recovered during Operation Paperclip. That's not a theory, that's a fact. It's written in black and white government transcripts. Stranger Things didn't invent this. It translated it into fictional way because reality was already too terrifying. In Stranger Things, 11 is the perfect symbol of this history reimagined. She lives in confinement. Her memories are fractured. Her abilities were not gifts. They were extracted through suffering. She is not just a character, she is a metaphor. When she enters the dark, soundless void known as the Upside Down, it feels like pure fiction. But that void bears an eerie resemblance to real sensory deprivation chambers. Used in Cold War experiments, rooms with no light, no noise, and no sense of time, used to erase identity and induce psychic breakdowns. There are real CIA records from 1955 detailing LSD tests on children, real notes from Nazi doctors about dimensional awareness in twins. Words lifted almost verbatim into the show S-Law, even the creature known as the Demogorgon. Monstrous and mindless reflects something deeper, a metaphor for trauma, for unleashed psychic rage, for what remains when humanity is stripped away completely. The monster is fiction, but the world it lives in, that world of silence, shadows, and stolen minds, isn't so far from what actually happened behind closed doors. But perhaps the most terrifying part of all this is not the experiments themselves, it as that in many of them weren't even illegal at the time, and many of the scientists responsible, they were never punished, they were never even questioned. They got new names, new passports, and new labs. They traded one uniform for another and continued their work under the banner of freedom. Stranger Things became a global phenomenon because it speaks to our deepest unspoken fear, the loss of control over our own minds, the feeling that reality isn't fixed but manipulated. And the worst part, that fear was once by design. It was a weapon more effective than any bomb, because while bombs destroy buildings, fear rewrites belief. It reshapes memories, it silences questions. So the next time you watch Stranger Things and see 11 bleeding from the nose, remember this. In real life, the blood didn't just drip from the nose, and the screams, they didn't come from monsters. They came from we children.